It's okay.
So I'll start sharing my screen and start the slideshow because I have a wonderful show with lots of pictures. Okay, so yeah, this is, I think, my first virtual talk, so it's really interesting to be speaking to a computer and to not seeing all of you. I hope everyone is well wherever they are in the world, and I hope that you're all doing okay with this period of stay home and confinement. I'm also, of course, not at ALMA, as you might think, but I just discovered the virtual screen setting in Zoom, so I'm actually sitting at home, as most of you are as well. And hopefully I can change your ideas a little bit and take you, at least in our imagination, virtually out of your living room and all the way into space. So the title of my talk is Exploring New Horizons. So for those of you that only just joined, Nicolas briefly introduced me. I'm an astronomer working for ALMA at ESO, which is in Germany, in Garching. But I'm also in, well, some of my working time training to become an astronaut. And I'm training to become the first female German astronaut. And I will tell you a bit about that in the next kind of 20 to 30 minutes. And then after that, if you have any questions, feel free and I will try and answer them as best I can. So I'm just going to start with how I got started in astronomy, in wanting to be an astronaut. So you've probably all seen these kind of images. So what you see here is Hubble Space Telescope data. It's a beautiful image of the so-called pillars of creation. So this is where stars are born. And these kind of images, I just have another one here. This is one of the lovely things about being an astronomer. You get to show lots of beautiful images. Here's another birthplace of stars, again, taken by the Hubble Space Telescope. So these images, I think, if you look at them and you just contemplate them, you will wonder, wow, the universe is amazing. This is just incredible. And it's those kind of images that really get people motivated to understand a bit more about the universe, that make them become fascinated with what is around us. So for me, it was actually quite similar. I also started off becoming interested in space by an image. In fact, I became so infatuated with space that I became an astronomer, and now I'm also becoming an astronaut. So it was really the beginning of an infatuation. But the image that so impressed me was nothing compared to these beautiful images that you have seen in the popular press. The image that really fascinated me and got me into space was this. So I don't know whether any of you know what this is. Unfortunately, I can't see from a show of hands here whether anybody knows this. So I'm going to explain. This image was taken by a Soviet spacecraft. I was about 9 years old, so this was a relatively long time ago. I won't say exactly how long ago, even though you can probably read the date on the picture. So this is actually Phobos, and Phobos is one of the 2 moons of the planet Mars. So you might think, okay, this image, it's really nothing spectacular, right? I mean, Phobos looks a bit like a potato, I would say. But for me, 9 years old, I discovered this, this image in my local newspaper. I'm from Cologne, Germany. So I was sitting with my parents at the breakfast table, and I saw this image in our newspaper. And I was just like, wow, this is incredible. Not because the image is so beautiful, even at that time, we had more beautiful images of astronomical objects, but just because that was the first time in my life when I was 9 years old that I realized, okay, it's not just our Earth. There is a thing such as space. Of course, I knew about the stars, but this was the first time that I realized, okay, we can even go to space. This spacecraft went all the way to this moon and took a photo of it. So from that time on, I was like, wow, there's so much to discover out there. I want to go and explore. And throughout my youth, I followed the voyages of Voyager 1 and 2, their mission. So these spacecraft visited most of the planets in the outer solar system in the 80s and 90s. And it was kind of a bit like the ancient version of Big Brother with planets for nerds. So I would, every few years, a new Voyager image would come out of one of these planets, and I'd be like, wow. And I try to imagine what it would be like to be living on one of these planets, or to even fly to them myself. In parallel to that, I grew up in the 80s and 90s. So the space shuttle was a big thing. Every space shuttle launch was really exciting. And it's still, yeah, I think it's still one of the most iconic rockets, just because it looks like a plane and it actually flies and it lands. So I also followed the space shuttle launches and everything that was happening there quite closely. And for me, the one person that really inspired me, that made me think, okay, maybe I could even fly with the space shuttle and fly into space, was this woman. So this is Sally Ride. Sally Ride was the first Western woman, so the first American woman in space. And she actually did a lot in terms of outreach, especially for girls. So unfortunately, she died a couple of years ago, but she had this foundation. She wrote children's books, which I also loved and read. And basically, when I saw Sally Ride, I thought, okay, until then, for me, an astronaut had just been this male person. It was just someone that had nothing really to do with me. But when I saw Sally Ride, I was like, my God, she looks like me. Well, I thought that when I was a kid, she looked a bit like me. She was actually also an astrophysicist, and she went to space. So maybe if she went to space, I could also go to space. And from that day on, I basically said, hey, I want to be an astronaut. And I told everybody that wanted to know or didn't want to know. And in fact, in my school yearbook from when I finished school, I found this just a couple of years ago, it even says, Suzanna wants to be the first person on Mars. So I'm not sure whether I'm going to make it to Mars in real life, but at least, well, virtually, I have already made it to Mars. So this is me in the NASA Johnson Space Center in Houston, Texas, and here I already made it to Mars. So this is what I now aspire to achieve also in real life. But it is a little hard getting to space, and it's also a little hard becoming an astronaut. So I think a lot of children start off wanting to become an astronaut, the same as I did. For me, this lasted until I was a teenager, and at some point I thought, okay, I really, really want to go to space, but is it really going to happen? So it's very, very hard to become an astronaut, because every time there is a call for new astronaut trainees, there are many, many people that apply. And I just knew, okay, this cannot be my career choice. I have to have a kind of plan B. I have to also do something else. And since I always liked stars and space, I ended up becoming an astronomer. And after some years, I started working for ESO, which is where I am also now. And I am, as I said before, based in Garching by Munich in Germany, but I'm actually an astronomer for ALMA, which of course is organizing these talks. So you all know the Atacama Large Millimeter Array, one of the coolest telescopes on Earth. And I was actually quite happy working for ESO and working for ALMA. And I've started also doing some science with ALMA. So this is just a really nice recent science image of an asymptotic giant branch star. So that is an old star that is basically about to die, that is casting off its outer layers in this weird spiral shell-like form. And we think that the reason the shape of this envelope of gas and dust around the star is so weird is because there is a second star that we can't actually see. So this is in fact a binary system. And this is, yeah, a very beautiful image. So I thought I would share it with you. But coming back to my story, I was very happily working away in astronomy in ALMA when 2016 happened. So what happened in 2016? In 2016, I was sitting in my office. We still had offices to go to at that stage. I was sitting in my office in Garching, and I was taking my lunch break and browsing the newspapers online, so the German newspapers. And what did I see? I saw this announcement. I saw that they were looking for the first female German astronaut. And it was just a coincidence that I saw this. But as soon as I saw it, I was, wow, I was, okay, I'm going to do this. I have to do this. I have to apply, because I always wanted to become an astronaut and it never really worked out. But this is my chance. But then in parallel, I thought, the first German female astronaut. By the way, for those of you that don't speak German, Astronautin means female astronaut in German. So that's why you will see Astronautin everywhere. But yeah, I thought, okay, the first female German astronaut, really? There hasn't been a woman? We've had loads of astronauts. And then I checked, and in fact, yes, Germany has had 11 astronauts, which is a lot more than most other countries, save the US and Russia. So Germany is actually one of the major spacefaring nations, but has not so far managed to send a single woman to space. And yeah, this actually quite shocked me. And this obviously also shocked the initiators of this project that I applied to, the Astronautin project, because they decided that we needed to change this. So we really needed to make sure there was a German woman in space. And why is this so important? It's simply because we need to create role models. So in Germany, and I also grew up in Germany, so I knew what it's like, you just see all these men in engineering and technology in space. And since astronauts get a lot of media attention, they're really omnipresent in the minds also of children. So we had the last astronaut here on the bottom right, Alexander Gerst. He went up into space quite recently, and in Germany, he's a superstar. Every child knows Alexander Gerst. And it was actually him that explained to me why it's so important to have role models. So he said at a press conference, he said, when he was growing up, and he's about the same age as me, he looked up to the German astronauts, Ulf Merbold, these pioneers, and he thought, well, if they can do this, of course I can do this. And that's when it really struck me. I thought, okay, wow. So I grew up in Germany under the same conditions as Alexander Gerst, and I was like, who is Ulf Merbold? So this is our first German astronaut. And it was just because I didn't relate to him. For me, the important person was always Sally Ride. And that was the point that I, for myself, realized how important it is to have female role models for the girls that are now growing up, that are deciding whether they're going to go into science, go into technology, what they're going to do with their lives. So I really, really believe in this project. But from the time of seeing the announcement to actually where I am now was quite a long way. And I had to go through quite a complex application process. So I'm going to show that here to you very briefly. So the Astronautin project has around 500 applicants. Then at first there was some screening. So they just looked at your background. So it was very important to have some kind of scientific or technological background, to have finished your studies in one of those areas, to be relatively fit. So we had some medical screening, some Skype interviews, and I'm going to show you here, actually, this is the original, questionnaires that we were sent. So they asked really a lot of things. So how often you exercise, how many hours you work, whether you do sports and so on. Also, how much coffee you drink, how much tea you drink, how much alcohol you drink. And for the last one, actually, I think it's really funny to note that the right answer to question 37 was not never, but the right answer was socially, because at least in Germany, drinking some alcohol is accepted as part of the culture. So it's completely normal to socially drink alcohol. So when people ask me, okay, as an astronaut, can you even have a glass of wine, or can you eat French fries or something like that? I say, sure, of course, I have to make sure I stay healthy, but I can live like a normal person anyway. Okay, so after this first phase, we had about 90 women left, and you see some of the women here. And it was actually really enjoyable to meet a lot of these women because they came from all kinds of different backgrounds, but they were without fail, intelligent, funny, just sociable, nice to be around women. So I think I can say that I've never, ever met as many women that I really admired in one place. So it was really a privilege to be able to go through the selection process with these women. And they really came from all domains. They were pilots, they were medical doctors, they were engineers, everything, completely mixed. So after this initial kind of pre-selection, the real selection process started. And this was taken over by the DLR, which is the German Space Agency. And this was just in 3 steps. So there were a set of cognitive tests, a set of psychological tests, and finally some medical tests. And after all this testing and selecting, we were left at the end with 2 trainees that would start the training to become the first German woman in space. So I'm often asked, why 2 trainees? Why just 1? Why not just 1 if you want to only send 1 woman to space? Well, the point is that if anything goes wrong, and this can just be getting a cold or getting coronavirus a few days before the launch, the rocket is not going to wait. So you really need a backup. So basically, it is not going to be certain which one of us is going to get to fly right until the last day. There will be a prime candidate and a backup, but if anything happens to the prime candidate, then the backup will get to fly. So that's why 2 women have to be trained right until the end to the same level. And this is us. So on the left is me, and on the right is my colleague Insa Thiele-Eich, who is a meteorologist. So I'm obviously an astrophysicist, she's a meteorologist, so we're both scientists, and this was actually one of the requirements for the mission, because we want to do a scientific mission. We don't just want to go up as space tourists, we actually want to do scientific experiments up on the International Space Station. So in terms of training, I was, of course, super excited to be selected and to be one of these 2 trainees. And I was wondering, what is the training going to be like? Oh, I was all excited. And in my mind, I was picturing something a bit like this. So I guess most of you have seen at least Top Gun. The others are Apollo 13 and Gravity. I was thinking, oh, wow, I'm going to be flying jets and fighter planes, and I'm going to be training in simulators and in weightlessness, and I'm going to look so cool. So, well, this is partly true, I can say, but reality more often looked like this. Not quite as glamorous and pleasant as I had imagined. So what's actually happening in this picture, I'm exaggerating a little bit with my facial expression. What is happening here is that Insa and I are drawing each other's blood. So this is, of course, if you want to do physiological experiments, you have to be able to draw your own blood to basically get blood samples while you're in space. So we were training to do that. This is all very nice. Just thinking about it puts a smile to my face, not. But we managed quite well. And in the end, we each ended up with lots of plasters all over our arms and many bruises and holes. But it was worth it because we now know how to take our own blood, and we will be able to do scientific experiments on ourselves. So we'll kind of be the guinea pigs. What else do we do in training? So of course, this taking the blood is not the only thing we do. We also do more kind of typical expected astronaut training. One thing that I often get asked is about centrifuges and all kinds of exotic things. And then I say, yes, of course, we also do that. But actually, the main part of our training is theory. So we have a very good theory trainer. We have to learn all about, for example, orbital mechanics, about different types of spacecraft, about the systems on the ISS, how do you get the electricity there, how is the temperature regulated, what happens to the oxygen, what happens to the wastewater. So we do a lot of theory. We also do some physical training, of course. We've done some simulator training and also some training on the experiments, which you can see there in the bottom left. So you can see us working on an experiment that is actually on the space station. Of course, we are now not on the space station in that picture, but we're working with a replica that is located in Germany. And the purpose of this experiment was to do material science. So you have these tiny little balls of different metals and you melt them in microgravity, which means you can melt them without them touching anything else. And then you see what happens when you drop the temperature again and when they solidify. So there's a lot of material science going on the ISS, and this was actually quite fascinating to get an insight into how this works. So this is a little bit of comic relief. This is actually me, unfortunately. looking a little bit like a Michelin man in a very low fidelity astronaut suits. So you might be wondering, why did this have to happen? That is also what I was wondering while I was walking around in 30 degrees in the south of France in this very, very hot spacesuit. But this actually there is some reason behind the madness. So what we were doing here is that we were learning how to carry out tasks in a spacesuit. And so we simulated these tasks. In this case, we're picking up a piece of moon rock. Of course, we bought the moon rock. This is not real moon rock, but we pretended it was. So we simulated picking up moon rock and doing all kinds of tasks like setting up solar panels and these kind of things on the moon's surface. And we started off just in our shorts doing it. It was quite easy, of course. We developed a schema, how to do the tasks most efficiently. And then it was time to get into this horrible spacesuit. So I was actually surprised how difficult it was to then do even the simplest of tasks, especially because the gloves were really, really, really thick, and it was nearly impossible to move your fingers or to grab anything. So this is really good training, of course, for space. And we took this a step further. We actually went underwater with the spacesuit. And the reason we did that was because we could simulate the gravity that exists on the moon's surface. So the moon has only a sixth of the gravity of the Earth. So on the moon, basically, you can nearly fly. When you walk, you're kind of hopping around and you're very light. And we basically simulated this mission underwater to see what it would be like if we carried it out on the moon, wearing these spacesuit mock-ups. And this is just having some fun underwater. So the spacesuits were actually a lot more comfortable underwater than they were out in the heat. One other thing I get to do for astronaut training that I really, really enjoy is flying. So I learned how to fly a small aircraft. You can see me there on the bottom with one of my favorite small planes. And yeah, this has really been a pleasure because I live in Bavaria. I can actually fly into the mountains, fly over the lakes. Those of you that are from this area might realize this is in fact the Chiemsee. So it's the Sea of Bavaria, as it's called. So being able to fly here is a real privilege and it's a lot of fun. I often get asked, well, why do you have to learn to fly these small planes? The rockets, I mean, what you have to do in a rocket has nothing to do with flying these planes. And yes, that's true, but we're learning the so-called transferable skills here. So what we're learning is really to work effectively under time pressure, sometimes also in emergency situations, because you simulate a lot of emergency situations during the pilot's license. So we learn to just work in a very structured way. We also learn to estimate distances and velocities in 3D space. And this is very valuable training, of course, for going into space. But the thing that I so far enjoyed the most about all of this training were the parabolic flights. So here I'm showing a little animation of how parabolic flights work. So this is a big plane. This is not me flying it. These are specially trained pilots. And what you can see is that the plane pulls up very, very steeply. And now you're going to see that it starts to flatten off and then come back down. So this is a shape, which is a parabola, which is why the flights are called parabolic flights. And in the top part of this shape, you're weightless. And it's not very long. You're weightless for about 22 seconds. Yeah, this is really quite scary. This is really scary. I watched one of the parabolas from the window and you're really like, oh my God, we're going to hit Earth. We're all going to die. But of course, as you can see, the pilots know what they're doing and they catch the plane. But yeah, basically, so in the top part, you have microgravity conditions, which means you fly like in space, you're weightless. And that's a really, really cool feeling. And just to show it a little bit, that's me just having some fun in the plane. Of course, the main purpose of this was to do scientific experiments in microgravity, but we also had some time to just play around and film some videos and have fun. And I think this is really good preparation for going into space, because actually at the beginning, when you do your first parabolic flight, you don't really know what to do. So you're just suspended in kind of midair, you're floating and you try and swim. but swimming doesn't help because you're not in water, you're in air. So you really can't move very well. So you get used to it very quickly, but it's kind of a good experience to have had before you go into space. Right, so why are we doing all this training? We're doing this training, as I said, we want to go into space, not just into space, but we want to go to the International Space Station, ISS. You can see a picture of the ISS here. The ISS is basically a giant scientific laboratory. So there are currently 6 astronauts on the ISS, and they're performing valuable science. And the plan is that we would fly there and then also perform our own scientific experiments. So we know where we want to go, and we know we want to go for a short duration mission of around 2 weeks, but we don't know how we're going to get there yet. At the moment, the only spacecraft that is actually bringing people to the International Space Station is the Russian Soyuz, that has been flying for many years very reliably. But because they're the only ones, they're very, very expensive. And we are a private initiative, so we are not ESA astronauts. We don't belong to the European Space Agency, which means we have to find our own funding. So obviously the price of the launch is the main financial factor. So the launch is the really, really expensive part. We think that it's going to cost about 45 to 50 million US dollars to get there. And because the Russians are the only ones that are flying at the moment, they are very, very expensive. So luckily for us, within hopefully the next few months, both SpaceX and Boeing are going to launch the final tests for their new spacecraft, for the SpaceX Crew Dragon and the Boeing Starliner. And we're hoping that by the end of this year, beginning of next year, maybe, they will actually be taking commercial astronauts such as us to the International Space Station. And yeah, we actually have a seat reserved with SpaceX. So we're really, really crossing our fingers. They have the last test at the beginning of May, if it's not delayed due to Corona, which we'll see. So we're really crossing our fingers that everything goes well for that. As I said at the beginning, our main mission is not just to go to space, but we also really want to inspire girls and women to go into science, show them how cool science is, that women can do any job that they want to do. So we're also doing a lot of outreach and media activities. So I'm just showing a few snapshots of that here. This is actually me in the ESO Visitor Center in Garching being interviewed about the lunar eclipse. This is me sitting on a toilet, but it's not a real toilet. This is kind of a stage where I did a little TV clip for teenage girls, which is really, really fun, telling them about yeah, what it means to travel space as a woman. But one of the funniest things I've had so far was the Bild Zeitung, which is kind of a German boulevard newspaper, kind of a trashy newspaper, calling me Miss Universe. This is still one of my highlights, I think, from all of the media attention we have got. And still my favorite job ever was being a tester of roller coaster rides. I love roller coasters at the Munich Oktoberfest. So those of you that live around Munich know what the Oktoberfest is. I think most of you know what the Oktoberfest is. It's basically the biggest beer fest in the world. And they asked me to test the rides for a local TV channel, which was extremely fun. And I only felt a little bit sick right at the end. But our main mission is, of course, not just to test roller coaster rides and get on TV. As I said before, our main mission is really to reach girls in particular. Of course, we're focusing on Germany because that's where we are. We want to be the first German astronaut. So we do a lot of events all around Germany, inspiring girls to follow their dreams, become astronauts. And we've recently launched a very cool competition. So this is of interest for those of you that live in Germany, Austria, or Switzerland and have kids or no kids that are in school, years 3 and 4. We have this really cool competition where the kids can program this little computer chip thingy, and they can program an experiment that we are going to take to the International Space Station and run there. So whoever wins their experiment gets to come to the International Space Station with us. I'll show the link for that at the end for those of you that are interested. So yeah, that's really, I mean, why I am also so motivated and so passionate about this project. It's really about motivating these girls to just follow their dreams, do whatever they want. And for me, yeah, I kind of hope that we can create a kind of Sally Ride for the next generation, so that the girls that are growing up today can say, hey, I will change the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Susanna, for all these tons of information you gave us. It was a really, really motivating talk. We are receiving plenty of hearts, and we had around 60 people at some moment in the peak connection on Facebook. So we have some questions from the public. You can ask more if you want over the Facebook. First, there is one about your British accent, and they say, how is that possible?
So my dad is English. Yeah, so I grew up speaking German and English.
Yeah. Excellent. So that was the hardest one, I think. No.
Yeah, I get that a lot, but although I don't normally give talks in English, I mean, most of what I do is in German, so.
Okay, we have a question about, do you know if there are some meteorites coming closer to Earth and how far they could be?
Okay, that is not my speciality. There are always meteorites around Earth, but at least I have not heard of one that is going to hit us soon.
Okay, and Fernando asked us, what was the most difficult part of the training?
Okay, so for me, I think it was, I'd say the diving, because yeah, I'm not one of these people that just gets in a diving suit and loves it from the beginning. So for me, it really, I found even recreational diving, I found quite claustrophobic. So then diving in this spacesuit, yeah, I found quite scary, and I really had to keep calm and yeah, keep everything together for that. So I think for me, that was the hardest thing.
And do you need to keep diving every once in a while now or not?
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
So we're supposed to keep up to date with the diving. We also want to do some more simulations if possible, because the simulation we did now was just for going to the moon, which we're not planning to do. So we would also do some diving training that is more for really being in zero gravity for space.
Eva or Iwa ask us, when exactly is your mission planned for?
So this is right now, it's really hard to say. As you know, everything is at the moment being delayed. So we're also worried how Corona is going to affect our mission, in particular the financing, because we were hoping to get the money from the German government. And obviously right now they have other problems. So we had a slot for the middle of 2021. So about a year and a few months from now. But that is dependent on how the SpaceX final test goes. So of course, if there is a problem there, then everything is going to get delayed a lot. But it also depends then on the financing, whether we manage to get the financing in time. But our hope is middle of 2021.
Excellent. Kathleen sends you a congratulation from Richard and herself. Richard, of course, I think they know you. And then we have a question from Chile. It's a long one, so I'm going to read it. Sorry for that. Thank you a lot from the talk. I'm Nico from Chile. That's another Nico, not me. And I'm starting a PhD in medical science. I want to ask you for advices or tips for how to get from the grad school research lab to the astronaut career, how to focus it. My dream job is to research on microbiology and immunology in space.
So I always say, if people tell me, how do you become an astronaut? I always say, don't make that your first career choice, just because it's extremely difficult. So you always have something that you're passionate about that is not being an astronaut first. But if you do want to become an astronaut, I think any kind of scientific or piloting background is always good. So I think, especially if you want to do research on the ISS, being a biologist is great. It's one of the best ways. But you also need to make sure that you have all the soft skills. So actually, after the first selection, the soft skills, for example, being able to deal with stress well, or being able to work well in a team, speaking very good English, because English is the main language in space, all become very important. So in a way, there's no one career that's going to guarantee that you're going to get into space, but just, look at the opportunities and apply whenever you can.
Thank you. We have a very nice question here. Does any of your astronaut training help you in the lockdown on the COVID situation? And would you be able to share them with us, with those tips?
So
from Viviana is a question, sorry.
It is a very nice question, and I'm wondering what the answer is actually. So I have to say, I find lockdown quite hard because, I mean, I was, as you can imagine, with the training and everything, I was traveling a lot before. I was always on the go. There was always something going on. There was always something happening. And of course, now our training has been cancelled. All the events that we were doing have been cancelled. So I'm all of a sudden stuck at home. I think for me, the first thing to realize was that it is a difficult situation. It's definitely hard, but I'm trying to see it as some kind of a training for the space station, because obviously in the space station, you can't just go out whenever you want. You're stuck in a small place with very few other people. You can't get away from these other people either. So actually that's what helps me in this confinement, is just thinking, okay, I'm an astronaut, I have to manage to do this. So maybe that also helps some other people if they think, okay, this is potential astronaut training and it's going to pass.
Thank you. So Manon asked, she's 18 years old, graduating next year from high school, and she's asking if is it possible to do any internship. She's really interested into space medicine, and she'd love to experience more about that, but if you have any tips for her. Okay,
so actually we are, I think, always looking for interns in Germany though, so I'm not sure where she lives. But if you want to generally get involved in the space business, I guess ESA is a good place to start. So we're a very, very small initiative. We're about 7 people, so very, very small. So for us, most of the intern stuff would be organizational, and especially media, social media, outreach, those kind of things. But if you really want to get into the space business, I mean, there are, depending on your country, there are many companies or the national space agencies that surely offer internships.
Excellent. She's from Germany.
Okay, great.
She just answered. So let's say hello to Andrea. She's just joining from ALMA also in the chat. Do we have any other questions? I don't want to miss them. You have lots of congratulations, lots of hope you make it to space. We have people from Japan, from the States, from Japan. Well, oh no, it's late night. It's not that late in the night. From France, from Ireland. I think we are done with the question over here. Oh, we have a new one. Did you study astrophysics, right? What was the process of your studies?
Okay, so for astrophysics, I basically just studied astronomy, but this is not possible in most countries. So I studied in the UK, and in the UK, you can do just a master's in astronomy from the beginning. In many other countries, also in Germany, you have to first study physics, and then you can kind of specialize in astrophysics or astronomy. So the way basically you become an astronomer is always you do an undergraduate study with a master's, and then you have to do a PhD, which is kind of your entry ticket into research as an astronomer. And then what normally happens after the PhD, so I did my PhD in Canada, Montreal, and after that you tend to do several postdocs, as we call them. So these are short-term contracts of normally 2 to 4 years, where you gain experience. And then with some luck and a lot of dedication, you might then get a permanent position at either an observatory, such as ALMA, for example, ESO, or at a university.
Excellent. That was from Miriam, the question. Iwa asked another question. It's how much time will you spend on the International Space Station?
Okay, so our plan is to spend around 2 weeks on the International Space Station. The reason for this is a short mission. This is about as short as it can get. The reason for this is simply the cost, because the longer the mission, the more expensive it gets. So I would actually like to go for longer as well, but we're planning with about 2 weeks.
Thank you. How long does it take to get to the International Space Station?
It depends, not that long. So on the fast, there are 2 trajectories. There's a fast and a slow trajectory, depending on where exactly the space station is. And the fastest they have managed with people has been about 6 hours. So this is shorter than a transatlantic flight. It's really not as bad. And to come back, you can do it in about 2.5 hours. So if there is an emergency, like a medical emergency on the ISS, you can actually be in a hospital probably quicker than from many places on Earth.
Wow, that's something interesting. And how you deal with do you have like a jet lag or something?
So the space station is on GMT, so that's Greenwich Mean Time, which is UT basically. So of course, I mean, depending on where you take off from, you'll have a jet lag, but then you deal with this as you do with any kind of international flight. You get used to the time zone, which is always GMT for the space station.
Excellent. So if you get to the ISS, any chance of doing a spacewalk? Would you like to do it?
I would love to. Unfortunately, the chance for us, I think, is quite low because we're training to become commercial astronauts. So we will do our own scientific experiments, but it's mostly the professional astronauts that spend a lot more time training and also spend a lot longer on the space station that get to do the spacewalks.
That was a question from Rosa Maria. Mehe from Tunisia. She's asking, she's an engineering student and she wants to do radio astronomy, but in her country, they don't have that field. So what path should she take and what do you suggest? Okay,
so I can't really talk much about Tunisia because I don't know the country. But I mean, I know, and this is one of the nice things about astronomy. I mean, I work with people from all countries pretty much. So just that there's not much astronomy or radio astronomy in that case in your country doesn't really mean anything. So a lot of people simply go abroad, even for the studies. Often there are grants from some of the bigger universities to make that financially possible. So I would check out what is available. And other people just study, for example, physics in their home country as an undergraduate, and then get a PhD position where there's normally also a grant, so you don't have the financial difficulties, and you can then just move to another country. And also in terms of visas, it's not a problem in astronomy. So in astronomy, that's one of my favorite things about astronomy, being an astronomer. You can move around very easily. So I think in a way, where you're born or where you live now should not matter so much.
Thank you very much. I think we can close with those words. Yeah. And I hope you enjoyed the questions and the activity. Yes. We are in a difficult situation everywhere in the world, so we want to continue this kind of activities. So please stay tuned for our live streamings of different talks and conversations about science in general. And that's it. I don't know if you want to say some closing words, Suzanna?
Just my new hashtag is, it's not even stay at home, it's stay zen. I think that is my motto, and that's what I want to give to all of you that have been listening. Stay zen, and we'll get through this. It's going to be over at some point.
Thank you very much. And stay home, stay safe.
Yeah.
Goodbye, everybody.
Bye.